The Tabletop Miniature Hobby Podcast is proud to be sponsored by Dr. Spork's 3D Terrain. From retro greenskin outposts to elven fortresses and obelisks, this is hands down the best nostalgic scenery you'll find out there, and all at stupidly reasonable prices. Check it out for yourself by heading over to bedroombattlefields.com/spork, that's SPORK, and turn your tabletop into a scene from White Dwarf circa 1994. Andy Chambers not included. Brought to you by bedroombattlefields.com, this is the Tabletop Miniature Hobby Podcast. When Jason interviewed Rick Priestley last month, all I had to do was set up the session, hit record, and then listen along as I painted some Blood Bowl 3rd edition humans. So when he got back in touch to say that he'd like to continue this narrative gaming conversation with Jerry of On Tabletop and Beasts of War fame, I was more than happy to do the same. This time I painted some Thundercats miniatures, and I thoroughly enjoyed listening along to the guys chat. Here it is.
I've a lot of remembrances similar to Rick Priestley. Obviously, there's an age difference between us. But when I started, it was off the back of first edition Warhammer and a history teacher who was really into his Napoleonics in the classical sense of wargaming. So he got me into historical. And then I found fantasy via RPGs like Dungeons and Dragons and Warhammer Fantasy then as sort of the first fantasy war game, but all of them required a GM or an umpire. So that school war games club, you wouldn't rock up with your, I've got my British line infantry for the Peninsular War and you're bringing your French Third Army, whatever it happens to be, and we're just going to play. It would be a very set, we're either going to replay this battle, in which case whoever was running it, was umpiring it, would have the forces organised in some semblance. I mean, you never had everything you wanted as a kid. So you wouldn't have maybe a representative amount of every regiment that was there or every unit that was there, but it'd be, okay, well, we've got this amount of horse, this amount of foot, this amount of artillery, they'll equate to X, Y, and Z. They've got the opposite. And how do we get this scenario underway? Well, the British opened up with a volley of cannons. That'll be the start of it. But then you would have the umpire would be doing things like, well, there was a thunderous downpour, came in halfway through the day, so maybe it turned 2 or 3. This would suddenly be explained to all and sundry. It was like, here is the crash of thunder, the skies darken, the rain comes down, and the effectiveness of your cannon goes out the window. And a couple of turns later, the ground is like a quagmire. And all of a sudden, infantry are hard going, but cavalry and their charges have completely lost their impetus. So recreating those style of games was where I came into wargaming from. And you had somebody at the head of the table explaining what was happening, narrating, giving you all the information, and then it was up to you how you took it and ran with it. And so, okay, well, it's raining now, X, Y, and Z's happening, it's all got worse for me in whatever respect, so how am I going to turn this to my advantage? Well, I no longer have to worry about a thundering French cavalry charge on the right flank. I'll have plenty of warning before they manage to slog the way over to me, so I'm not too worried about that. So maybe I'll swing the infantry around and engage the centre in a ballsy move. And that style of game has always been so much more interesting than the points values being tacked in. And I know this is something of some friends that I game with, and they said that points values are more or less to the detriment of gaming. But everything seems to be skewed now towards points, to the extent where I think if you were to hand somebody a rule set that has no points in it, they would rebel against it. In fact, I can go one step further. The initial black powder from Warlord Games that was written by, I think, Rick and Jervis, or certainly Jervis had a big hand in it. it specifically didn't have points because that was the style of game they were attempting to recreate and play. You had an umpire, you were trying to recreate something, and therefore here was the book that just contained the how do you work out moves and stuff. You don't just push that unit forward. You survey the area, point to a far off hill, and say that 64th foot will advance to the top of the slope and pour down suppressing fire on the French infantry below. And then you would roll to see whether or not they actually reached it and did balls up somewhere and walk off into a forest or run away in a panic, whatever it happened to be.
So much more fun that way.
Yes.
It's so much more fun. I came at it from the arse end of it, obviously, because I've started off with nothing but points and competition, and this is the very narrow view that we do things. Here's the gun line against your gun line. You're not going to win because you haven't got the latest, and off we go. And I am loving this discovery late in my gaming life. That is not really a discovery; it's more of an archaeology.
Well, yeah, you dig through enough layers, but even that Black Powder over years when they were releasing expansion books and they released the Zulu War and they released X, Y, and Z, and then slowly points crept into it because people couldn't fathom just playing a game with an umpire or without attempting to recreate something. And now with the second edition came out a couple of years ago, I think points values are just pretty much in that game across the board now,
yes.
Which is tragic.
It's strange to me because I actually had a bit of a mental wrench to get my head around. It's so simple that it's counterintuitive because of the background that I've come from. And you just don't need points, and you don't need anything other than that judgment of being made of what you want to do. And that's so freeing. But it's so freeing, it's almost confusing to players coming at it who have never experienced that. I presume D&D players perhaps will have a better chance of it. But even D&D is quite narrow view now, isn't it, with the rules and everything else? It's not quite free form in the same way.
Yeah. When the creatives leave and the bean counters get involved, that's when everything changes. So,
it's as literal as that.
Yeah, D&D is a prime example. We want to sell you books, therefore we need to have a reason to sell you books. In whenever the 70s, 80s, 90s, whenever I was big into my role playing, I would pick up loads of rule sets, and that was it. It was you would pick up Don't Look Back, Terror's Never Far Behind for an X-Files style RPG, and you didn't need tons of books. It was one book, the GM bought it, and that was it. Everybody else could sit at the table with a sheet of paper torn out of a book to scribble their character sheet on and notes. But as time progressed, it's like, well, if only one person is buying a book, we're not making much money. So all of a sudden, the GM's guide comes out. Rather than just having a role-playing game, you've now got the GM's guide and a player's guide. All your players need the player's guide or player's handbook. And then if they've got a skill, cross-class, monk, elf, warrior, ninja, whippet, then maybe they need another book that has that in it. And over time, the amount of books being published, not just scenario books, but you need umpteen handbooks to craft the finest min-maxed character, because it's all about stats. It's not about role-playing at the end of the day. And I know I've played with some people who are massive D&D fans, but all they come down to is number crunching. And they're not doing any of the narrative style of thing. It's like, it's dungeon delving, not role playing. It's, we go in a room, there's 5 goblins. Where are they? Okay, I'm going to use this feat. I'll do this leaping attack. Somebody else will shoot them. The bard will strum their harp and we'll all get a +3 for our dice rolls. And then we can move on to the next room. And years ago, I was running a game for some D&D players, and I started them at level 20 because so often they were fixated on, here's my stat line. At the next level, I can buy this, this, and this and get better. And at the next, and they weren't playing a character in a game; they were playing a block of numbers. And I got round that by just going, you start at the top, you've got whatever you want, then we're tell the story. And some of them didn't like that at all, because they were just always looking at the stats and looking at the next level. And likewise, I think Rick said this in an interview a long time ago. Somebody at Games Workshop had seen how much profit there was to make off the Land Raider and some of the big tanks. And the Land Raider was the first massive plastic kit Games Workshop had released, the sort of the precursor to doing things like the Bane Blade and stuff like that. And once they realised how much money, pure profit, could be made off one box of that compared to 30 or 40 Little Men, they started going, well, this is much more substantial, this is better. And I think they turned to Rick and said, can you put those into Warhammer? We need monsters that are bigger than a tank. And that's when we started to see things like the 100 by 150 mil based griffins and stuff appearing from, whereas before they'd been on 40 mil squares. And it was because some being countered had got, we'll make much more profit if you start making creatures and creations that are huge. I think Rick said it was at that point he was planning on getting out of Dodge. And that's it. When you don't have a creative direction anymore, you've got a profit and loss. Then at that point, it doesn't become about the artists telling a story in whatever way it happens to be. So yes,
I'm going to risk being generally rude to the general populace now.
Feel free. I generally am.
I'm wondering whether we're a quite narrow slice of population, because it's so odd that so many people, because for them to make that the majority of their business model, one has to presume that that is the majority of the sales that they're getting is based on that. So, why wouldn't character and story be more popular than, oh, you'll win with this? And I just wondered, because most people are interested in having fun, aren't they? In life, generally speaking.
I mean, for some people, winning is fun. For some people, it's collecting is fun. I don't want to get to the point where this is just going to be me bashing Hasbro or Games Workshop for an age, but because they've got the dominant presence on the high street and on the internet for role-playing and for wargaming, in most cases they are people's first point of contact with the hobby, either RPGs or war games.
Am I remembering right to think that you were in Games Workshop for a time?
I guess you were. Everybody was. You probably were as well. You've just forgotten. But if you join into a hobby in that way and you never experience anything but that, because my White Dwarf collection starts, there's RPGs in it and other games. And then that was the early days of Games Workshop when they were just a game shop that was selling stuff. And then they were selling specifically their own things because they had a better profit margin on it. Brian essentially went, Brian Ansell, we're importing all of this stuff from America for D&D. We've got very fine profit margin on it, but we make more money out of our own miniature ranges and our own games. So they slowly started to push more and more towards Warhammer and Games Workshop products. And then eventually all of that disappeared. So my early White Dwarves are filled with sci-fi and fantasy novel reviews, music. When Warhammer used to have the heavy metal record label, RPG scenarios for a host of games, both stuff Games Workshop published and stuff that they just, brought in to sell. So it wasn't their own IP. So Judge Dredd's in there alongside Traveller and then D&D and Call of Cthulhu. And then all of those various different games sort of slewed down into a whole set of White Dwarves that then become just the Games Workshop hobby. And then we hit the sort of 90s period where GW took off massively. And as the 90s progressed, you get less of the narrative in there and more of here is the flavor of the month. The flavor of the month is the new Blood Angels. So let's have 15 pages on Blood Angels, and here's the guide for painting your Blood Angels, and then here at the back you can see all of the codes for you to buy your Blood Angels. And it's just the way these things go. And Dragon Magazine was something similar for TSR when they had the control of Dungeons and Dragons. So by the time people get into it these days, if they pick up a White Dwarf, I don't even think Dragon Magazine is going, but if they pick up a White Dwarf, it's all there within the Games Workshop ecosystem. You don't buy paints from elsewhere. You buy your GW paints. They've got the brushes, they've got the glue, they've got the painting guides, they've even got Warhammer TV, and they've got all the models and games, and you're not exposed to anything outside that unless you happen to be very lucky to find some way, because you can't walk into another hobby shop on the high street belonging to a big company. You might walk into a small hobby store that just does sort of bits of everything, but they don't have the same impression. You walk in and go, oh, there's a local game store and they've got a bit of this and a bit of that, and they've got 3 boxes of Mantic, and they've got some bold action stuff, or maybe a Battlefront box on the wall, but they can't show you how to play any of it because they don't know all these different games from these different companies. But you go into Games Workshop and they know all the product, they know all the games, they can introduce you to it, and then you never have to leave. And if that's what you've been introduced to, then that's what you know and becomes familiar, and the points value is very much intrinsically part of it. A big thing a couple of years ago was the introduction of Crusade, which, like Shay and some of the younger gamers at OTT up in Coleraine, they got big into Crusade, even John, playing it. And the idea is that it was narrative based. It had a looser assemblage of points values. So you weren't going, it's 13 points per man, 2 points for an Auspex scanner, 5 points for a flamer, ... here's my 1900 point army all mapped out perfectly. It was very, 10 points a man and they've got whatever you want them to have and don't worry about it. But play a sort of more narrative style game with the narrative scenario, and that the freedom that they had from that. You hear a lot of people talking about how the Crusade form of the most recent iterations of 40k is just really freeing, where they're not having to worry about all of these granular little points and just thinking, I mean, you're so close. You're just take another step beyond the granular point system to the Crusade freeform point system to take what you want and just go nuts.
See, yeah. I'm with that entirely, because I don't know if you've seen on my that's the project system that you guys are a part of, that I've got a bit of a crusade that I want to proselytize what we're doing and try and get more people to do it. Mm-hmm. Because of that freeing, relaxing aspect. I mean, one of the things that's a real strength of Matthew's Discord is that they, much like yourselves, treat Games Workshop as a small slither of the wider hobby. And I found that people that have categorically had an association with Warhammer of going, no, never touching it with a barge pole. And they associate anything toy soldier as Warhammer, by the way. That's just how people think on it. Yeah. And they've gone from that to going, this is really fun. This just looks like a board game. Yes, essentially that's what it is. It's a board game we've made, and we're making whatever we want. What do you want to do? It's good fun. And I've got loads of ladies coming along, or people of various generations coming along. I've got people that have no interest whatsoever in doing miniatures and making terrain, but they're there just going, this is a good crack, Jason. Let's go and do this, mate. It's good fun. And I'd like to push that more. And it's difficult because of exactly what you've explained about because it's so entrenched by that large companies from across the pond as well as over here and whatever else, that getting past that barrier of, not for me, when actually, of course it is. It's just a story. It's just a story mucking about with your mates. And how would, because you've got quite a broad vision of the general industry from where you are, and you've got a generally, you seem to be very informed on how a lot of people can engage with shops and things. How would you try and push this with wider audiences of people? Because it's quite intimidating, I've found, for many people.
Yeah. I think it's getting it in front of people is the hardest part. Joe McCullough of Stargrave, Frostgrave fame, his war games have done remarkably well for Osprey, and they've been picked up massively by the general public, the wider audience, whatever you want to call it. And a lot of that comes down to really driving the character, the narrative adventure. you are playing a wizard and his warband in the Frozen City, and it's broad strokes. You don't have every street mapped out in Fellstadt. Your wizard and your wizard's apprentice, I mean, they've got a school of magic they adhere to, but that's it. There's not much of a stat line for people to hang their hat on. It comes down to, what do you want it to be? How do you want to play it? And I've seen people struggling with that free-form nature, and I've seen other people going, well, it doesn't actually say that my whole warband can't be dwarves. And then the next person will go, yeah, but what do you have to do to make them dwarves? Just like put them on the table. There's nothing that says a soldier has to be human. They could all be, giant humanoid chickens, and it would make no difference to that game system at all, or to the world. But it's how people approach it, and a large amount have really enjoyed what they've found with Joe's approach to gaming. Now, there's still points values in it, but it's more heavily narratively driven. Even things like Oathmark, which I think is getting a second edition this year, which is his fantasy mass battle game. And again, it's generated by your lands. So you don't go, oh, I've got an elf army, so I'm going to play elves and have the elf book. You go, okay, well, what land surrounds my castle? My city's here. It's in the middle of the mountains. I've got a lot of access to good steel, so I've got heavily armored infantry, and then I've got cavalry, because we've got svelte fields of wheat down there, big grasslands to feed them all, and I've got a forest so I can have arch. So you start to create your world, or your part of the world that you're defending, and that informs what you can recruit for your forces, and therefore opens up the idea that you're not playing a single race game or a single race army. You can have humans and dwarves and so on and so forth all mixed together because of that. So sometimes it just needs one game to come out and really capture the imagination, and then spread like wildfire, like Joe's stuff has, through a lot of gamers. On a grander, broader scale, it's so difficult, because every time you come up with an idea or suggestion, the internet is such a terrible place these days that rather than being promoted or propagated, it tends to end up with X number of reasons posted under the blog or vlog or whatever it happens to be, explaining why you're wrong and how it won't work. It's the sort of the negative drive. And it's just a case, you just have to keep pushing the fun. And if you can do it locally, like you've been doing, then that's a great way of doing it. If you've got some form of platform where you can sort of shout it to the broader audience, then happy days. But I think we've hit a point with social media where the propagation of new information has never been easier. But because of that, there's so much out there that you're just a single tiny voice shouting into a chasm sometimes, and there's hundreds or thousands of other voices shouting that their way is better or different or what have you. So
sheer white noise.
I hate to be pessimistic, but I just think we've had a point where 20 years ago, a company could have pushed this message much better. 10 years ago, they would have had trouble. These days, it's an uphill battle. And at the same time, you've got a big community of gamers out there at things like Gen Con and Essen and the like, where they see more of the same all the time. And anytime something comes along that is even a little bit different or possibly not even, possibly a little bit retro, where it throws back to, here's something you could do a bit different. And all of a sudden people are going, oh my God, that's amazing. I think, but I've played this game before. It's not exciting and new. It's just, like you've said yourself, it's something old rediscovered. And it's just showing people that the current way isn't the only way, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. I don't know why I'm so keen to push it on new people as well. Usually you'd just be quite a passive thing to let these people in. But I've had the opportunity to, because of COVID, I brought my wife in because I was going insane. And she thankfully stopped me from going insane. She ended up really liking Frostgrave and Dungeon Saga. And she's never played any game like this before. And I didn't do any of the rule stuff. I just went, look, we're just playing a scenario. So it brought us closer together. We brought in some of our friends, everything else like that. I've got a much younger sister who goes to Comic-Cons and things like that. She's very much an outgoing, outside type person. She loved Dungeon Saga because we're having a bit of fun with it. And I just felt this compulsion to try and promote that fun through other people, and even through our own hobby, because it just feels better that way. And I don't know why I'm so interested to do it, but I am. So I appreciate you giving the call on that. You seem to have a good idea of what's going on in ancient battles and things like that in historics. Has this happened in the historic scenes as well? That this gone quite literal, quite pointy, points based, quite we're keeping in these tram lines. We're not going to do free form. Well, or has it always been there?
Yeah, no. Even before I mean, like I say, I was lucky that my first introduction to historics was by somebody who had a similar narrative idea. But there are people like the War Games Research Group, the WRG in England, who were responsible for codifying a lot of stuff in the sort of 70s and 80s. So the reason a 1-inch tall figure stands on a 20 by 20 mil base is because a 20 mil equated to 1 yard, I think it was, and which they thought was the reasonable amount of size for a man to stand on, ranked up with another man to stab somebody to death with a spear. So little things like that were starting to be codified and locked down. And there are certain games that take it to not an extreme, well, maybe an extreme, and they have done for years. So there's things like the DBX systems, so Debellus Antiquitatis, Debellus Multitudinus, things like that. And those are very rigid in what you play. So while they may have a historical or historically accurate ratio of units within, you only ever have like 12 elements aside in those style of DBX games. So you have your Psiloi light infantry. That's one element. You might have some medium cavalry or heavy cavalry or some heavy infantry. And if you're playing the Romans, it will tell you this is the ratio of X, Y, and Z that you can take. So maybe you can't take more than 1 unit of light infantry, but you're absolutely maxing out on heavy infantry to give you the feel of how a Roman force would be deployed. And they would even have things like what sort of land is representative of the area. So Romans might have a lot of arable land and maybe some mountainous Italian regions or that sort of thing. So when you were playing, depending who was the attacker, who was the defender, it would be very set. You're attacking me, therefore I get to choose the sort of land we're going to be fighting on. But then you both have 12 elements, 12 units per side. So it was a big battle, but evenly matched. So there's always been something, even if it's not down to critical points values, that there would be limiting things where you have this tournament style of play. And I think the main issue is when the games become tailored not just to people who want to play the style of game, historic, fantasy, whatever, but specifically to one section of that community. So this game is seen as a tournament rule set. And at that point, then people are like hawks looking for imbalance. And if that's in there, that doesn't seem right. And therefore other armies or units have to be rebalanced or repointed to make it equal. And then after a while, you're going, well, that doesn't make any sense historically. Nobody told the Huns or the Mongols that very fast cavalry with little men with bows on it was bad because other people couldn't keep up and he got shot to death. So could they please get down off their horses and stop firing so many arrows? The Huns and the Mongols just rode right across most armies. So balance in historical games just it does my nut in. I can't understand why, with the exception obviously of a pickup game. You don't know you're going to be. You know you've got the day off to play. You don't know who's going to be at the club to play with. You chance your arm. This is something I often get told. I don't think I've ever played a game like that in my life. I don't think I've ever shown up somewhere with an army in a box, hoping that somebody else would have an opposing army that I could play against. I've always, even at a club, it would be like, oh well, maybe I'll play you in 2 weeks' time, and then we can sort out what we're doing. But the idea that you can play anyone because we're all using the same points just becomes so restrictive and rigid in style and function that it just bores the shit out of me.
I turned up once to a club not knowing who I was going to play. I'll never do it again, and I'll never find my opponent's body. I'm just not going. It was such a painful experience. And I can understand what you're saying in a positive light, actually, with historic war games, if they're using it as a means to understand an aspect of the period. So although it's work that they're doing, it's work to enhance their own enjoyment of understanding that period. I can get that. That's so being in a narrow view because of that. But I'm struggling to understand. Actually, no, you even said it on the Hitlercast. It was, when did we stop understanding that this was meant to be a hobby and fun?
Yeah.
Because that seems to have happened. It all seems, I think our friend Mark on here has said, it all seems very serious a lot of the time. For instance, everything that you've described there about those narrow channel views and balance and making sure you min-max and all that, it feels an awful lot like bloody work, the kind of thing that I'd avoid assiduously with my taxes. I have no interest. What's happened?
It's a very good question. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know why. Maybe it's because of the money people are spending on it that they think they have to be more focused on it. But I mean, the initial hobby rule set, we'll say, for war games was H.G. Wells' Little Wars. And it was about getting down with your toys on the carpet and playing on the floor. Grown men, you should be on the floor with your toys, pushing them around and trying to do whatever. I think I had a subtitle for, like, boys who want to be generals and the more discerning type of little girl, or something. It's something like that. It was, quite Victorian Poe-faced type of thing. But you can find BBC, like Pathé News, real documentary of Grand Moff Tarkin, or Peter Cushing, as he was known when he wasn't in a galaxy far, far away, in his carpet slippers on the floor with his Napoleonics, playing those same H.G. Wells rules. And I know Alessio Cavatore talked once about his first sort of idea of war games was going down to the beach near his house, putting the men in the sand, and then taking like a marble and going poop and throwing it, and there'd be a little puff of sand, and then the men would fall over, and the ones who fell over were dead. The ones who weren't were still up. But everything has become more regimented and fixed. It's, you've got rules and points and determination of movement, and stories have sort of dropped by the wayside, and it's all become very math centric. And I used to go to tournaments with a club from Northern Ireland, so I would go to things like the European Team Championship, the ETC, back in the day.
Did you enjoy them?
I enjoyed the company and I enjoyed the games. I was never massively competitive, so I would turn up with random shit. So I'd put together a 2,000 point list of undead that was, ridiculous. But people, and this was late 90s, but even then, with the advent of the internet, there were the quintessential net lists. If you're bringing this book, this is one of the best tier armies. Therefore, you probably beat everybody, and everybody agrees that this specific 2,000 points out of this book is the best to bring. So you bring a vampire with the Hydra Blade. He's a blood dragon, so he's got million attacks and frenzy. You bring a unit of Cav and this, that. So you would essentially print out somebody else's list off the internet that everybody else has worked out is the most optimum list to bring. The one that is statistically likely to do the mission. And that's what tournaments are about. It's about elimination of possibilities. So if you charge Unit A with Unit B, you should know the outcome before you do it. And net lists sprung up from this. So I would rock up to these with some sort of mad horse shit that I've put together because it amused me, like an army of nothing but squig hoppers, or as many squig hoppers as I could bring, who were all random movement and randoms be damned, and you didn't have a clue what was going on. And then you find that people couldn't cope with them because they knew their army, and they knew if they faced an orc and goblin army, it would have this in it. Or if they faced an empire army, it would have this. They knew what they would be facing in every army that they were facing. And then you bring something that they weren't expecting, and they couldn't cope because they didn't know how to deal with something that was outside of what the internet said they would find. And I even found this in Kings of War years later. Showed up with an ogre shooting army with a load of lightning bolts and, running about the place, and blasted an elf army off the table with more shooting than them. And he was utterly, because he looked at it and went, but you don't have Grok and Magog and you don't have X, and so why have you brought them, and what are they doing there? Going, man, don't worry about it. So you just sit back and enjoy yourself. Because I am. I think that's it. But people have forgot that hobbies are supposed to be relaxing and fun. You're supposed to enjoy doing them. I see an awful lot of talk about cost, and yes, some of the stuff in the hobby can be very expensive. But
wow, I mean, that's
all
relative.
Well, but this is it, though, because you don't look at it. Golfers don't go, well, that new driver is carbon fibre shaft and it's going to cost me £600 for it, or whatever it happens to be. They're going, it's a bit much, isn't it? I wouldn't do that. And likewise, they look at things like, I looked at a wee 10mm 1950s retro sci-fi game called Atomic Punk recently. Atom Tank. It is Atomic Punk, but it's a 10mm sci-fi game, and somebody was going, too expensive. Do you go, then, to buy it, but the aesthetic of that looks great. I absolutely love that retro sci-fi 50s feel. And then the fact that it's a small company, they've got to make their money back somehow. But people start to sort of know the value of everything without realizing its actual value is how much enjoyment you get out of it. So they just go, well, that's very expensive. You go, it is what it is. And if it's something I like, I'll buy it. And if it's something I don't like, I won't. Yeah.
I don't think it's that expensive, Jerry. I really don't. I mean, especially when you get things like these these Landscape kits, you get an entire army for what, £85, £90? And that's 2 drinking sessions. Especially in London or something stupid. I mean, I bought my missus a food mixer. It was £300 and I wondered what happened. I felt punch drunk. And I actually, when I paid for that, I went, this is 450 Landsknechts. Are you sure?
Can I pay by Landsknecht? Just pay by volume. But yeah, I mean, Moonstone, the multi-award winning Moonstone.
What are your favourites, right?
It's by far and away, both because it's so aesthetically pleasing. It looks absolutely gorgeous. But again, you see people looking at it going, oh, it's X for, it's £26 for 3 models, or whatever it happens to be. So it's about £8 a model, slightly more. I think they've gone up recently. And you go, okay, right, but you're not buying 500 of them for the table. You're buying 6. So really, it's a complete force for £50. But put that aside. If you want to, you can do it for free, because he has everything, and I mean everything, available on their website to download for free. The only difference is instead of getting the resin miniatures, you'll be printing out a full colour cardboard standee. But otherwise, the full rules are on the website. All of the decks of cards are on the website. Every figure they've ever made is on the website. And more importantly, it's an incredibly fun, interesting and narrative game. There are no mooks. There, little, here's my chaff unit that I will throw in there. Every model in that game is a character with a name and a backstory and a part of history of Tauber, and every time they do something, it expands it. And sometimes we see people move and grow and shift. And little Eric, the squire, who was out for about 6 or 7 years, played a big part in a campaign a few years ago. And the campaign results, they ended up sculpting 3 different versions of him as a fully grown knight, and had 3 different storylines. And depending on the results that came in from the community as to who won, essentially between the 3 factions, was the one that Eric was going to choose. So you had him potentially leaving the Commonwealth to go against them as part of the Dominion, because he had been overlooked for knighthood for so long and had just been left as a squire by the Baron. And so they had this whole story, and it was like, okay, well, here's how it goes, and we'll play these games, and somebody wins, and now we've got Eric no longer as a squire with a wooden sword, but as a fully fledged knight. And he's going to play a big part in the next story and the next story. And there's so much fun to be had in the narrative side of that community, where you don't have to worry about points. There's not a point in that game. You bring whatever models you want. You just have to have the same amount of, or they just have to have the same faction token. And some models are multiple factions, so they might work for 2 or 3 different ones. And you go, okay, well, here's my 6 models. Do you want to bring 6 trolls? I can. Will it be very slow and incredibly difficult to get anything done? Yes. Will my opponent hate me as they have to try and remove 6 trolls from the table? Yes. But do the models look great? Fantastic. Yeah, they do. So it's potentially you could do it, or bring 6 gnomes or 6 whatever. You just pick what you want to pick because of who they are and how they play, and then go and have fun and tell your story within Tauber and see where the game develops over time as well.
What's got your attention right now in the hobby? What are you painting, playing or planning for this month? Head on over to bedroombattlefields.com/voicemail to submit a clip for our monthly hobby update episode. That link again is bedroombattlefields.com/voicemail. And now back to the show.
Do you think rule sets matter most, or is it attitude towards these games that matter most? Because you clearly quite like collecting rule sets as much as anything else. But
yeah, I think it's attitude. There will be certain rule sets where I absolutely love them to bits for whatever reason.
For me, it's Dungeon Saga. I just love Dungeon Saga.
Dungeon Saga's great. Dungeon Saga Origins is a nice, easier, accessible one for the kids. The Walking Dead by Mantic is a mind-blowingly good rule set that is so adaptable and modifiable. And I know I've been banging on about this for a long time, but Ben has been talking about doing a Hitman, that Mr. 47 computer game thing on the tabletop. And I was going, you just do it with The Walking Dead. It's got a really simple dice system. Now, they are special dice, so red, white, and blue, and each of them has a different value of successes on it. So I think red only has a 1 in 3 chance of getting a single success, and then blue has no failures and can go up to 3 successes on one side. So when you come to look at that, you go, okay, well, how can I do something? There were no rules for climbing or falling in The Walking Dead, and the sort of the first weekend it was released, they did a big thing up on tabletop, or Beast of War as it was at that stage, and I was just up as a punter, and I ended up running some multi-games where there was like 3 or 4 people, and I ended up essentially being a GM. It's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go in here, you're going to do this, and somebody's going, okay, well, can I climb that? You're going, yeah, sure. Give me a skill roll, and it's a 50-50, so the white dice. Well, there is actually a 50-50 dice in The Walking Dead, it's the black one. Roll that. If you roll a blank, you've fallen. and do that for each level of the building. So if you fall when you're on the ground, doesn't matter. If you fall when you're level up, then you take a red dice worth of hits. If you fall when you're 2 up, it's a white dice. If you fall when you're 3 at the top of the building, then it's a blue dice. And that's how much damage you will take without any armor or any way of mitigating it. And it was very simple. Jump, 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 jump. Oh, plummet. Oh, your head's all over the pavement. But as a system, it's a really tight, technically board game system, obviously designed for zombies, but you just go into it and go, okay, well, how can I change this? Normally noise attracts zombies. But then I was looking at it from a point of view of if we were to play Predator, instead of the many being the monster, well, the many in this case is either Arnie and his team with their weapons, or maybe the previous team that got annihilated, or the villagers or whatever. You could have different levels of it. And the one in this case is the Predator moving and trying to take out everybody on the board. And every time he makes a kill, if there's noise, then people go towards it or will fire towards it. And you can just suddenly shift the whole skew of the game just by how you interpret it. So I think how you look at a rule set is more important than the rule set itself, because you can go, well, this is a good rule set, but not for the game they're selling it for, but this could be a fantastic rule set for something else. And I will quite happily go in and go, well, this is cracking. I'm stealing this for future reference elsewhere.
So you're going in, as you say, it's more of it's setting a tone that you can then apply to whatever you're having fun with. It's almost like a little taster piece. So that's like that dice mechanic. Oh, that's interesting. That's quite fun. Let's do a bit of that. Yeah. And rather than going, oh, this is the much more balanced, this is the much more superior manner of dictating this scenario or whatever. It's just about chasing a bit of interest and fun for you.
Oh, very much so. That's one of the reasons why I haven't really settled on a Napoleonic rule set 30 odd years after, well, actually closer to 40 years after I started playing, because I keep looking at rule sets and going, it's too prescriptive, and it's not how I see my Napoleonic games being played. And I think it's because everything's been coloured by Mr. Fusco and his interpretation of Napoleonic wargaming for us kids. And I don't know what game he ran, but you know, to give you an example, in the 90s, I played a game that was run by Chris Caves at I think the Northdown Warlords. He specifically put it up for a group of us all from GW Belfast. We're all staff members who were looking to get into Napoleonics, and we were playing. And I had a cavalry unit that I decided would light brigade it. They charged the guns. I was like, I know I'm going to get hammered, but we're fresh. We've got good morale. I think I can do them. And then I'm minted. And so did that, took severe, and the whole time it's like, do you want to do this? You sure you want to do this? You know, this has been terrible. You're going, yeah, I don't mind, because I broke through the gun line. Most of the unit was still intact. They'd taken a hammering, but now they were behind the enemy's line and nobody was in squares. And it's like, I can just rampage back and forward to my heart's content. And then he went, okay, after completing the cavalry charge, your unit must return to your own battle lines. And then he picked them up and returned them, because that was the rules. And I'm going, but no, because Napoleonic cavalry, especially some of them, like the Scots Greys, like, they were famous for ridiculous charges and never doing what they were told. And it didn't matter that you told them that, you know, I would need you to retreat to the line. The blood would be up, they'd charge something, and then would just go. So essentially you got one good charge at a target you wanted at the start of a Napoleonic conflict. And then after that, all bets were off, because you didn't know where the cavalrymen would be. After that, they'd just be rampaging everywhere. And so once they're behind the enemy line, in my head, I'm thinking, yeah, the rules say that they charge and retreat, but we all know they wouldn't. And now they're sitting looking at the ass of half a dozen different French units. They would be in there. Put those cavalry back. And so I think things like that have coloured my perception over the years, where rigidity of a rule set, so rules are there to be absolutely shattered when it's not fun and doesn't tell a good story. Whether it's in keeping or not is up to the players, I suppose. But yeah.
Are you a natural GM?
Yeah, I think that's possibly my problem. as well to a certain extent.
I've loved doing DMing and GMing. It's one of the things I've enjoyed most. Have you got a favourite moment or a favourite sort of thing to do as a GM or a DM? Have you got something in your mind that suddenly jumps up and you go, do you know what, that was grand?
I mean, there's a lot. And some people take GMing in different ways. I generally sit down with...
I'm a silly sod.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
Well, everybody wants to be Excalibur, the 1980s film, Excalibur, all grim, gothic, and then shiny armor and very serious and haunting melodies playing. But we all end up as Monty Python and the Holy Grail very quickly. And I tend to do things on the fly quite a lot. So I'll go, well, here's the start, here's the hook, here's where they're going to end up, and then I don't plan anything else in. And I know other people who are very meticulous in like every line of dialogue is written or every step on the journey is contemplated. And the problem with that is players are, unless you railroad somebody, players are going to go off the path. And I think it's better to be very improvisational. Yeah, good GMs are ones who are able to adapt rather than force the players back onto the story because they haven't planned for whatever the players are doing. And this has happened to me a few times. I was running they used to have competition games at a convention I used to go to.
Are they competing over?
Well, here's what it would do. It was the old days when people actually would show up and play RPGs and stuff at conventions. It was great. So they had a room set aside beside the bar that would have 6 or 8 tables in it. And each table would take like 4 or 5 players plus the GM. And so they would have like, Vampire the Masquerade, first session of the day, maybe afternoon session would be Call of Cthulhu. So every table would be playing the same scenario. But then it was you would just mark down how much fun you had. So every player around the table would sort of go, okay, well, who do we think is the best player at this table? And they would go, well, he was because he was doing funny voices or he really got his character or he did whatever. And then the GM would also pick somebody and then they would just sort of, it was just a throwaway thing, but it was a chance for people to play these sort of scenarios. And I always played Call of Cthulhu. Absolutely love it. I can't get enough of Call of Cthulhu. It is the epitome of RPGs for me. And this year I turned up and there wasn't enough GM, so I was asked, would I run it? I was like, okay. So I got handed the GM scenario and I read it and I read it again and I read it a third time and still couldn't work out what the hell was going on. It was set in World War II in German-occupied France, and there was a lot of nonsense going on, and I could see there was all this sort of, they'll go here and they'll do this, and it'll form like a pentagram on a map, and it started with a solution and then had tried to work a scenario in so that all of the points would, and it was...
That'd be impossible.
It was inconceivable. It melted my head. And what I ended up doing was there was just one little line in it. Et tu in Arcadia ego. And the only reason I know that is I had not long finished reading the book, The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. The guys who tried to sue Tom Hanks and Dan Brown for the Da Vinci Code. And it's a big old thick book. It's 400 or 500 pages of Jesus had kids and there's a bloodline and all this nonsense. So it's a shit insane. It's real conspiracy nonsense. But
I do enjoy a conspiracy though.
I
do enjoy them. They're very fun.
If you want to see what the Da Vinci Code would be if conspiracy theorists really believed in it, this is it. But that line, I too am in Arcadia, is on a mausoleum, on a painting, like a Renaissance painting, somewhere in France. And the background of it is a set of mountains in, I think, like the Cathar region, where there was a Gnostic sect who were killed by the Templars and blah, blah, blah. So all these things were still sitting in my head from having read that book. And it was the only piece of text I used from his entire scenario. It was like, okay, you've got your characters, here's the setup. And then when they got to this bit, I led them down this path all about this instead, which ended up with me just going off on one, and they ended it with a lot of people going absolutely insane in catacombs in these mountains with undead Templar knights and stuff. But then afterwards, because the games are only, I want to say it's like a 3-hour session for those competition games because they have to fit within a bracket. So they're very short scenarios generally. When we were finished at the table, it's like, okay, well, we're still not done with the story. So we went downstairs to the bar. We just sat in the corner and kept playing my version of the game for about another 4 hours. And then the next day, they were talking to other people who were playing on other tables and realized my story bore no resemblance to the story anybody else had done in that room. And a lot of the other people who'd played the actual proper scenario as written were quite annoyed because they couldn't make head nor tail of that scenario either. And they didn't even have the maps and stuff that the GM had access to. They were just having to try and work it out from things. Whereas I'm going, yeah, well, sometimes North Hotep will take you to the Black Pyramid and whisper in your ear, and sometimes he won't. And it just depends whose table you'll sit down at. So yeah, I like the jazz, the freeform aspect of that sort of thing. And I have a friend who's also a gamer role player, Tony, and he is an interesting fellow as well. He did drama, and he's the sort of fellow you would look at and go, you didn't do drama. At no point did you do drama at university. And it's like, yeah. I go, I can't imagine you pretend to be a sunflower in the early morning rain. But what he really liked was directing. And I don't think a lot of people think about it like this. If you're playing a role-playing game, or if you're umpiring or GMing a tabletop game, you're a director. You're serving the story.
Yeah.
And he is practically laconic when it comes to GMing, because he will sit back with a smile on his face and just let everybody at the table talk to each other in character. And he'll just occasionally, if people ask questions or do something, he'll respond to that. But what he won't do is sit with a wall of text in front of him and tell you what's happening. He's told you where you are. He's told you why you're there, or you've told him. And then it's up to you how you play that out. And he ran a 40k campaign for us at one stage. And it was very similar, where he was playing the Planetary Defenders. We were playing the Imperial Army. So it was a mix of Imperial Guard and Sisters of Battle and a few other things. It was all narratively tied in. But essentially it was like, okay, well, it's a planetary landing force. You've got hundreds of thousands of troops. Work out what your force is. So it wasn't even to points value. We were literally going, okay, well, we've got 2 full regiments of this. We've got these tank regiments. We've got X, Y, and Z. And then he would start going, okay, well, you've got reports have come in of smoke in the distance, and would send like recon troops out, and then they'd come back and they'd say it's a armored company. And they go, okay, well, what do you want to send against it? And I go, okay, well, we'll send these infantry with these heavy weapons and these tanks, and go, okay, right. And what percentage would that represent of your force? So you go, okay, well, we'd end up playing a game on a tabletop with 50 or 60 infantry, 3 tanks, or whatever. But he was viewing them, 3 tanks and those 60 men, as multiple companies. And then casualties were just sort of stroked off, because you're on this planet now. You've got to try and retake all of these cities, and the army you brought with you is your army. And in a normal game of 40k, you go, well, I'll throw my 2,000 points against your 2,000 points, like 2 stakes, slapping it together, and then some of the meat will be alive at the end. But this time around, you couldn't do that. And at one point, I committed more of our forces than we should have done to what I thought was going to be an easy victory, and we got minced and lost every bit of armour we had brought to that planet with us. So it was like, there was no tanks left, there was no artillery. I was like, oh, well, shit. Well, this is going to make some of the story coming up very difficult. And he would forever put us in these narrative places where you go, okay, well, I really fancy doing some sort of strange dungeon crawler with guardsmen, using the rogue trader rules. So we'll work out who you all are, and we just get down and play it that way. things like that I think are hilarious.
I was going to say, this is the first conversation that's made me genuinely quite excited at the idea of trying to do a role-playing game. I've never done full RPG, Joey. I've never done it.
I mean, well, as the man says, you must be ready then. Because when I look at things like your battle reports or the characters like Flashheart and Queenie.
Did you like Flashheart?
Oh, I love Flashheart. He was firm and fruity. Love the beard, Nursey. But when I read that, it just steps off the page as screaming role play. You know, it looks like something that somebody has put down there on the table and gone, well, here is a character. And yes, we all know who Flashheart is. So if you've seen Blackadder, you know the sort of character he is. But then you see those little rules in about X, Y, and Z. A little Flashheart quote and then a rule to go with it. And I mean, that's telling your own story right there. I did something similar for Zulu.
Oh yeah, what did you do?
So I have, if you haven't seen it somewhere, I have a project for it. It's probably marked as complete, which is why you probably haven't seen it. I, years ago, decided I would really like to do the film Zulu on the tabletop in 28mm. So it's not as big as your games. There's 117 defenders. And then I've got 4 impies of Zulus with 32 in each impy. So
did you run it on the Weekender as a game? I think I've seen it once.
I invited people over. People came over. A couple of people came over from America, and then people came over from England and played it. It plays on a 8-foot by 12-foot board. Is that right? Yeah, that sounds about right. I had to contact somebody in England who made gaming mats to get this big, massive felt desert mat to be big enough. It's accurate for 28mm, so the inside of Rorke's Drift is about 38 inches long, because at 28mm, so at 156 scale or whatever, that is the correct footage for the defences. So it's as accurate as I could get it, but it plays using Daniel Mersey's The Men Who Would Be Kings Blue Book, Osprey Blue Book. See, Osprey rule sets, they're great. And it's designed for colonial warfare, but he had a few things in there that you can chuck in, like even when you're playing normally, like a real person, there's a table to roll on for your commander to see what type of a guy is he. Is he a coward, like a Flashheart that doesn't like people to know? Is he a drunkard? Is he a courageous lion? And then that informs the game. And so I was looking at all these things. I'm going, okay, well, every unit for the British was led by one of the characters from the film Rorke's Drift. So you had Chard, you had Bromhead and Colour Sergeant Bourne and so on. And each of them would have a quote with a unique rule that I'd made up, something that I could then hand these cards to a player at a convention who's never played before and go, that's your unit, that's your hero. For example, Chard, who was the officer commanding Rorke's Drift, had "Sing, damn you, sing" from that bit where they're trying to outsing the Zulu with Men of Harlech at the end. And once per game, he could do that and remove all the pin markers or suppression markers on nearby units as he sort of steadies the line. Or one of the corporals, Corporal Allen, fire at the smoke. So he was allowed to fire at the Zulu snipers on the hill and ignore one of the minus modifiers for range or whatever, because they weren't really firing at individual men, they're firing at the smoke. So he got a bonus to fire back at them, whereas other people wouldn't. Or, and it was just, here's something from the film, and maybe people haven't done historical games, but a lot of people have seen the film Zulu. So if you hand them a thing with a picture of Hook on it, and, right, Hook, my lad, you've done your bit, it's time to be off, and then just, right, there you go, Hook's in the hospital, but he doesn't have to make a roll to move, because you normally have to make like a command check to move in the game, and if you fail, you just sort of stay where you are. And it was all about these little, every unit, every squad was a hero and his men, and give them a chance to just shout something randomly. And also I had a pet helmet and a red coat that I would wear when I'm doing it, so I could stand there with a swagger stick and point at things.
I do like having a good prop myself. just having a hat on or something silly.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how much in historic gaming you've seen, but there's a channel called Little Wars, funnily enough, named after H.G. Wells. Americans, they're pretty much do exclusively historic games, but they will, if they're playing like feudal Japanese, you'll have people there in it's not a kimono, but
I know what you mean. Yeah.
The daytime version of kimono is with one of the little fan that generals would use for doing hand signals and stuff for directing the forces on the battlefield. So they'd be at the side in this full Japanese outfit. Or if they're playing,
doing that.
Napoleonics or Wild West or whatever, they'd have people dressed up and they'd be really getting into the character of who they are as a commander, and they do little talking head bits in between. And it shows just how good narrative games can be when you've got people who enjoy not just the game, but getting involved down to,
just being a silly sod.
Enjoying being somebody who pushes toy soldiers around, because people get too po-faced, and at the end of the day, you're playing with toys. People, just break into a smile for once in your lives.
Well, I mean, I'm definitely keen. I mean, I've got other reasons to come to Northern Ireland. If I ever came, would you be interested in joining in a game if I brought one?
Oh, very much so. Or the alternative is if I ever managed to make it across to England to something.
Oh, hell, you're more than welcome. There's Boyle, right?
Yeah, that's true. Bring out your lead. That's one I'd meant to go to for years, and unfortunately I missed my chance. See that up there?
Yeah.
Which obviously me pointing at something where on a podcast isn't great for it's not great for radio.
Warhammer First Edition, right?
Second.
Second, is it?
But
missed out.
It's signed by 2. I can't find my first edition anymore. It's somewhere else. Anyway, it's signed by 2 of the 3 authors. The last one I needed was Brian Ansell, and I never got across to Bring Out Your Lead, and then he sadly passed away. And I would have liked it because it's got Halliwell's name on it, and Halliwell's has passed as well. He was a terrific rules writer, Richard Halliwell. Sort of
Space Hog's quite tight and cool, isn't it?
Yeah. He was terrific, and then decided, I'm just going to go travelling and be sort of a free spirit and wander around. So, and he wasn't in Games Workshop then when they became massive and people didn't really, you hear of Rick Priestley, you hear of Jervis Johnson, very few people have heard of Halliwell, Mitch Halliwell. So, just terrible shame.
Thanks very much for listening to this episode of the Tabletop Miniature Hobby Podcast. If you enjoy the show, then please do share it with someone else you think might enjoy it too. And be sure to check out our Discord community of like-minded hobbyists, which you could find at bedroombattlefields.com/Discord. It'd be great to see you in there.